Going to be imposing a 25% increase.
And we're going to charge. What we're going to be doing is a 25% tariff.
The moment Washington raised tariffs on steel and aluminum to 35%, the consequences rippled through international trade, particularly for Canada. In response, Ottawa quickly pivoted its export strategies. Shipping routes were swiftly redirected, no longer prioritizing American ports. Canadian metals, particularly its low-carbon steel, were now shipped to Antwerp, its lumber to Yokohama, and hydroelectric aluminum to Germany. As the domestic made-in-Canada rules tightened, West railways were doubled, ensuring efficient transit for these redirected goods. This was the beginning of a dramatic shift in the North American trade landscape. The once symmetrical supply chain linking the US and Canada began to splinter, forming new expansive corridors leading to 3 continents. This shift raises the question, how will the US respond as it faces rising costs for its own manufacturers? The loss of its neighboring market could push the US further into protectionism. Will Washington escalate the tariff wall and push the 2 countries into a full-scale trade war? Or will it seek a new strategy to counter Canada's diversification? The no single market doctrine. Before we dive into these questions, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, hit the notification bell, and like our videos to stay updated. On July 31, 2025, in a press conference in Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney made a bold statement. Whether it's lumber, steel, automotive, or aluminum, Canada will not allow North America's supply chains to become dependent on a single market. This declaration was not just a policy shift, but a direct challenge to the trade dynamics that had dominated Canada-US relations for over 4 decades. On that same day, the White House announced its decision to remove the selective exemption clause from the 25% tariff on steel imports from Canada and Mexico. The tariff would gradually rise to 35% by the year's end.
And welcome back here to Live Now from Fox. I'm Andrew Kraft. Thanks for being with us here. Let's now head to Washington, D.C. Live picture that increased the tariff on Canada from 25 to 35% to effectively address the existing emergency here. So,
journalists immediately questioned Prime Minister Carney about Canada's response. Carney's answer was clear. Canada would redirect $45 billion worth of goods, primarily raw materials and finished products, away from the US and into European and Asian markets. In a proactive move to protect its industries, Carney also revealed that the federal government, along with state-backed financial institutions, would prioritize diversifying Canada's export routes toward the North Atlantic and Indo-Pacific regions. While this decision was presented as a strategic response to protectionism, the actual numbers reveal the economic scale of this shift. As of 2024, Canada's annual exports to the U.S. amounted to $11.6 billion in steel, $9.3 billion in aluminum, $8.8 billion in lumber, and $64.2 billion in automotive products. The 35% tariff increase on these goods threatened to push prices higher, affecting the price base of the entire trade flow, which totals around $100 billion annually. To mitigate the impact, the Canadian government decided that exporters could not bear the full burden of escalating costs. The first move was to shift export destinations to Europe, leveraging the Canada-EU Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA, which allows for tariff-free access to the European market. Additionally, Canada's low-carbon steel, produced in electric arc furnaces in Thunder Bay and Hamilton, would be exempt from carbon taxes under the European Green Deal, thanks to a new classification in the European Commission's low-carbon steel category. This creates a competitive advantage for Canadian steel in European construction projects. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way. Canada's expanding export strategy. The Canadian Federal Cabinet entered into agreements with Export Development Canada, EDC, and Business Development Bank, BDC, to provide financial support for steel distribution companies operating in Europe, from Denmark to Spain. The first wave of this shift will involve 2 million tons of Canadian steel being shipped via the St. Lawrence Seaway. Lawrence Seaway to Antwerp. This diversion alone will account for 18% of Canada's steel exports, traditionally destined for the US. In addition to steel, Canada is focusing on aluminum exports to Europe, driven by its low-carbon hydroelectric-powered production methods. Quebec's aluminum smelters, with energy-related carbon intensity a tenth of the global average, are well-positioned to meet the European market's demand for eco-friendly materials. This initiative is further bolstered by a $4.8 billion deal with Swiss-based Constellium and a BC-based supply chain company to convert 700,000 tons of Canadian ingots into final profiles in Germany and France. Shifting lumber exports to Asia. Lumber exports are another sector benefiting from Canada's diversification strategy. Canada has long faced disputes with the U.S. over softwood lumber. However, over the past 5 years, Canada's share of lumber exports to Asia has increased by 15%. As the U.S. increases tariffs, Canada is speeding up its shift toward the Asian market, particularly in China, Japan, South Korea, and India. Vancouver's port will see increased capacity, while the Prince Rupert Container Terminal will expand to accommodate growing lumber shipments to the Pacific. The Canadian Forestry Association forecasts that South Korea and India's rising demand for construction timber will help offset the logistical costs associated with this shift. The new volume of lumber exports to Asia will reach 12 million cubic meters per year, valued at $6 billion. The automotive sector's response. The automotive industry, deeply integrated with the U.S. market, faces the most complex challenge. Assembly lines in Ontario are linked directly to U.S. factories. With tariffs in place, the price base for vehicles entering the U.S. will rise by an estimated $3,000 per vehicle. The Canadian government's response is to focus on electric vehicle production. By 2028, Canada aims to sell battery-powered SUVs in Europe, leveraging Ontario's burgeoning Battery Valley, which will see $2.4 billion in federal investments. If you found this video insightful, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Stay tuned for more updates and content. We've got plenty more coming your way.